Welcome, everyone, to Rounding the Bases Live, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust. My name is Joel Goldberg, and we're about ready to wind down week number 4 of this podcast. The guests continue, and it's actually funny. My guest today is one that I've been wanting for a long time on my weekly audio podcast. But I think sometimes what happens is you get to know someone already, and then it just sort of, you meet new people. Oh, let me get you on. Oh, let me get you on. And so it's just kind of slipped through the cracks. And so we'll get to the guest in a moment, because I'll make this guarantee right now. You will learn and be better from this conversation. At least the answers that come from my guest, John McGraw, in a moment. I want to thank my friends at Enterprise Bank and Trust for their partnership in helping me bring these messages out to all of you, whether you're watching live on Facebook or YouTube or streaming it later on after the fact on those platforms and LinkedIn as well. Please share it with others. These are conversations that I really hope can help everyone during these challenging times, and I really appreciate Enterprise Bank for what they're doing, and they are so busy right now dealing with all those loans. Also, would like to thank my friends at KC Cattle Company. Got the shipment in last Friday. They deliver to all 50 states. They're up in Weston, Missouri, veteran owned and operated, led by Patrick Montgomery, former Army Ranger. It's Wagyu beef. It's local. It's unbelievable. If you like to eat steaks and meat and all that type of stuff, it's your place. They're incredible. They're good guys. So thanks to KC Cattle Company. You can check them out on their website or go to their social media for all of what is going on. And I'll remind everyone, if they're sold out of something, just give it a few days. You'll see it reload on the website really soon. Without further ado, I want to get to my guest today. And I think maybe a lot of people know John McGraw as the former safety of the Kansas City Chiefs. But if we talk right now about the world of pivoting, and everyone's pivoting right now, John made a massive pivot many years ago and founded a company called Vision Pursue. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But first and foremost, the formalities. I know you and I talked for a few minutes off camera, or whatever you want to call this world that we're living in here. How are you doing right now, John?
Joel, good to see you. Thanks for having me. Doing well overall, a lot like everyone else, I think, where we're just riding this out as best we can and trying to get as much information as we can and respond as effective as we can, but kind of like everyone else. So excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, this is a passion of yours. Actually, I think on a scale of how much I've talked to you about football in the few years that I've known you versus performance mindset or my business endeavors or anything like that. Let's just talk the entrepreneurial business world and throw performance mindset in there versus Chiefs. It's probably been about, I'd say, 98% to 2%. So it's a total coincidence that I have John McGraw on today and the NFL draft is tonight. That I don't even know that I knew that the NFL draft was going until a few days ago when somebody was saying, boy, I need something live to watch. And so I think that'll serve a lot of people well. And yeah, we could talk about Mahomes and Chiefs, but you're doing so much more than that. I don't mean to minimize football. How did you get into this end of things? Because I know it's truly I think it's truly your passion in life, or certainly what brings you purpose.
Yeah, it was really an organic transition out of football, retired from football because of concussions, and got into studying as much neuroscience as I could for just pure survival, trying to long-term health longevity. And so began studying as much neuroscience as I could, and just got me into this whole world of mindset and everything from the neurology of how the brain works, the psychology of the mind, the relationship between the mind and the brain, and then the physical implications of that. It was a fascinating world, just without the concussions, but then you throw that in there, and I had a very strong motivation and drive to learn as much as I could.
And just to remind everyone, or if they've never heard it before, and I don't even remember the number, how many guesses on concussions during your football life?
Yeah, it's really in the dozens. I had, I think, 9 documented where I was unconscious or couldn't function, but then had dozens and dozens more. I mean, oftentimes on a regular daily basis, where I was concussed. Now, back then we didn't know it was concussed. We just you got your bell rung and you're just kind of jacked up and you can't see out of your left eye, but you can still remember the play call. So you keep going, and turns out that's not good for you.
Yeah.
Shocker. So I had a lot.
All right. So I want to move forward. And so Yeah, I mean, if anyone watched the Chiefs back when John was playing, you'll remember him as that safety, or maybe those K-State days, and it was certainly a great story. But to me, your story was just beginning when you got out of football, because the impact you're having now on people's lives and companies. I want to put up the website, because really Vision Pursue, and I know this, and I've used the app and actually need to use it more. It's everything you've always told me. When you're in rhythm and you're doing it on a regular basis, it's like the muscle memory of working out. And when you get away from it, you'll remember it, but it takes a little while to get back to those type of habits. And I think right now, John, more than ever, we all need those habits. I mean, I would say that we needed them regardless, but right now, so many of us are having to dig down deep to places that we've maybe never been before, or we didn't know existed. We're dealing with situations that we've never dealt with before. So on the simplest level, how much is going on up here right now? I know there's always a lot going on up there. This sounds like such a simple question. How complicated is the brain?
That's a great question. That's definitely beyond my ability to describe. I will say we've learned a tremendous amount about the brain in the last decade, understanding what different structures do, but there's still a lot we don't know. What we do know is that when we are presented with a challenge, particularly one where we don't always have control over how that challenge is going to play out, it releases certain chemicals in the brain. Certain parts of the brain become more active, and there's some pros to that and there's some cons to that, right? And so understanding the nature of the automatic brain, understanding its programming, and then learning how to respond to that programming is an absolute game-changing journey to go on. And at the end of the day, what you want to have is, we call them mental skills. You want to have the mental skills at your disposal, right, to employ when they're needed, right? When a certain challenge comes your way, you can bring those skills out and you can go and you can maintain a certain level of performance, a certain level of control over your internal state, a certain level of life experience, so that you can more consistently show up how you want to show up. And now probably it's never been more important to have mental skills at our disposal to face some of the challenges that COVID-19's brought our way.
Yeah, so let me take everyone through a little bit of a scenario that I think everyone has gone through. Even if you're the most positive person, I consider myself a glass half full positive guy. I've had a few moments. I haven't had nonstop moments, but I've had some big ones where you feel like the world's caving in, and why me, and all that type of stuff, and it just starts to snowball and snowball and snowball. So I think sometimes just those deep breaths, those meditation type of skills can help, and some people focus on that. But what's going on when that negative creeps in, and then it gets worse and worse, and suddenly all those little things that probably even shouldn't be bothering you all pile up at the same time? What's going on?
Yes. So we call those automatic thoughts, automatic emotions, and this is a part of your brain that's trying to protect you. So it goes into survival mode. And it's going to begin to think about worst case scenario so that you're not surprised when it happens. Right? The problem is that usually those worst case scenarios are not the most likely of scenarios. They're possible, but they're not probable. So we spend a lot of time wasting it on those doomsday worst case scenarios, and then we're not prepared for when reality hits. So getting our expectations into alignment with reality is really, really important. That's challenging when there's a lot of unknowns. Right. And so being able to manage our expectations is a really, really important mental skill. And oftentimes we create them mental expectations that are way too low. Right. So we catastrophize and we think about every worst case scenario. So they're way down here. Right. And then we go to other parts of our life and we create these really unrealistically high expectations. Right. How family members are going to all of a sudden just be really appreciative and respectful all the time. And your kids are always going to be happy and get along, right? And your boss is always going to be really thankful for all your hard work and all these other things. So we're just completely getting ramrodded by these unrealistic expectations. And so in this scenario today, where we don't know how this is all going to end, right? Your automatic brain is working really, really hard to try and write the final chapter to this, right? To write the end of the story, even if it has to make it up, and even if it's really bad, because at least I know that, and actually that provides a little bit of comfort for me. So the challenge here is to be able to suspend the need to create an end to this story, right? The ability to say it's okay not to know how this is all going to play out, and I'm going to respond with the facts that I have as best I can, and that's good enough. And so that's a hard place to get to, because again, the automatic brain does not like not knowing. It wants to be able to control the end and be able to expect it, and we just don't have enough information right now to create those expectations.
Was I right to say though before that this is like working out, like a brain, a mental workout, in the same way that you lift, you're benching, you're doing whatever you do with the physical weights, and you get in that rhythm? Is it the same thing, the same type of practice?
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's no different than learning an instrument, right? Or learning a new language, or those mental reps, doing it over and over again. You just become more skilled at it, and then you can employ them more effectively when the challenge comes.
All right. So when you're talking to companies right now, and I should say, let me pop the website back up here, that there are a lot of different ways to get involved with Vision Pursue, and I've been lucky enough. Actually, we talk about Enterprise Bank and Trust. I think you and I both presented at a board meeting last year, right around March of 2019, and so we both have friends over there. But I know that you are involved with all types of companies, and whether it be something corporate, whether it be a professional sports team, but also the individuals can get involved with this too. The app is amazing. But I want to focus on the business side a little bit. What are you hearing from leaders or some of your contacts in the business world in terms of how they're navigating these times, and how their mindset can maybe help them right now?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that anytime we get punched in the face, it's really natural to want to shrink back, right, and to avoid, and so we have to counteract that. And what I see leadership in companies, and what I'm encouraging leaders and companies to do, is to take communication to an all-time high, and be transparent about the struggles, right, and have a lot of high touch points with their people. I think that's a really good strategy. I also want to encourage some organizations, a little bit this is contextual based on what's going on with their teams, but I like leaning into this. I like having a default aggressive Jocko Willink, a Navy SEAL commander. I don't know if you have any Jocko fans out there, but that's one of his mantras, sort of this leaning in aggressive. I'm not going to be reckless, but I am going to be aggressive because I'm working against my nature, which is to want to kind of shrink back and not avoid some of this. So I would encourage that. And then setting expectations as best you can without creating unrealistic expectations, and without coming out and say, hey, Memorial Day, we should all be back to work, or 4th of July, we should all be back to work. That's not healthy. It's not helpful, particularly when we get there and that's not the reality. And so the more we can kind of hold off on setting those expectations, but say, hey, in the short run, here's what we know, and here's the way we're going to respond in the short term.
I was thinking about a little bit of an analogy, and not that everything needs to go back to sports. I obviously relate so much to baseball, but I think in terms of communication, and they were in the middle of spring training when this thing all developed, and then suddenly kind of stopped the world as we knew it, or at least changed it. The spring training is that time, and you remember this from two-a-days in football. It's where you work on all those fundamentals. It's where you're building all of those skills. So you watch guys call on the I got it, and it's amazing what happens when you forget to do that, or it doesn't happen, and suddenly you have that big blooper. It seems so easy to tell them, well, just communicate more. You think about it in terms of football. If you're out there and there are 11 of you out there on defense, sometimes 12 of you don't communicate right, and that's a problem. But you got everybody's got to talk, right? I mean, it's maybe it starts with the middle linebacker, but the safeties have to talk. There has to be that communication. And so if I'm understanding correctly, it's almost like in the heat of the moment, your back is against the wall, and maybe you kind of protect yourself a little bit, and really you need to be communicating more. That volume raises up at the Super Bowl in that big crowd, and you've got to be able to get above that. Is that a decent analogy?
Yeah, you nailed it. And we call that the mental skill we use the phrase we use is called going external. So think about, we go out and maybe we're playing for the Chiefs, and all of a sudden we're down 21-0 first quarter, and we're just getting pounded, right? The natural tendency is to want to go internal, right? Get lost in my own little headspace. I'm on the bench. I'm on the sideline. I'm not talking to my teammates. I'm not encouraging. I'm not thinking about hey, how are we going to make adjustments? I'm just sort of shell shocked, right? And that's normal. So what you got to do is you have to counterbalance that by going external. You need to make yourself talk, get out there, encourage your teammates. And that's a really helpful practice. And then the opposite is also true. If you go out and you jump up 21-0 on people, all of a sudden everyone's high-fiving and talking, and pretty soon you're talking about what you're doing after the game, and you're distracted, right? And now it's really easy to lose that momentum that you've developed. And so in that instance, you want to go a little bit more internal and be thinking about, okay, how are they going to attack us? How are they going to come? What do I got to do next, right? And so I'm just constantly working against my own psychology and my own natural tendency to overreact to my environment.
I have a question that just popped up on Facebook. It's from a friend, and if you haven't met her or seen her yet, she's at Royals games all the time. She, I know, has been honored at the Chiefs, but it's my friend Sarah Nauser, Kansas City Police Department. She's battling ALS with as much grit and toughness and grace as anyone that I've ever known.
Wow.
She's a true warrior, and so she popped up this question. What do you think of the correlation between concussions and ALS? You may not know, but I want to throw it out there. If for no other reason than any chance I ever get to give Sarah a shout, I do it because she has that pull on people. But anything there?
Yeah, Sarah, thank you for the question. I think that there's been some studies that show there could be a correlation. I don't know if there's any demonstrable proof saying that, but there is a link, and that was a concern for me as I was coming out and wanting to understand how the brain works. And there's definitely a link between traumatic brain injury, CTE, and some of those chronic degenerative brain diseases as far as what I've seen. So that's where brain health is really, really important, and understanding all the different things that impact the brain, from diet and nutrition and exercise and sleep, oxygen. People aren't getting enough oxygen, dehydration, not drinking enough water. And then of course, the mental skills that some of we're talking about today, all those are really important things to consider their impact on our brain and long-term brain health.
It's a good question from Sarah, and I appreciate that. And I think I texted with her maybe about a week ago to touch base, and her comment, I believe, was like everybody else's: when are we getting baseball back? And I couldn't agree with that more. We all need those diversions right now, and that's one of the challenges. But I was telling you before we started the interview that I caught up quick phone call with Mike Matheny the other day, and he almost flipped this thing upside down. And I wonder about the mental exercise of that, of saying, hey, we've never had a better opportunity than right now to connect with people. We've never had a better opportunity to work on that communication and to spend more time paying attention to others when we're always so lost in the middle of things. Now, personally, I find myself as busy right now out of work than I've ever been in my life, but it just looks different. So how interesting of a technique or a thought process is that, to almost flip this thing upside down and say, wait a minute, not woe is me, what an opportunity.
Yes, it's a great mental exercise, right? And it challenges your narrative of how this is all playing out, and it helps introduce potentially a different narrative, and one that might help you respond differently in this. And so I couldn't agree more with that. I think this is a tremendous opportunity for a lot of people to sort of take stock and to look around a little bit and remember the things that we probably weren't feeling a lot of gratitude for a couple months ago, and all of a sudden looking like, wow, those aren't guarantees. And life the way it used to be, there was a lot of really good parts of that. And when they come back online, hopefully we'll feel more gratitude for those. And then maybe some things won't, and maybe there'll be some really good changes that take place on an individual level, on company levels, on a country level, and a world level for us as we go through this. But this can be a really tremendous opportunity. And when you look at mental skills training, particularly emotional training, the greater the emotional experience, the greater the opportunity to rewire, the greater the opportunity for some intense brain training, if we can stay conscious during it and not go into our sort of default resistance mode. And so there is tremendous opportunity, tremendous challenge, but also tremendous opportunity for all of us as we go through this.
I know one of the things that's helped me in the last couple of months, which went along with some of the training I've had through Vision Pursue, was started journaling a little bit more. And that's been a really good reflective exercise. Actually, one that I got away from a little bit in these first few weeks. I almost felt too stressed out, and I forced myself to get back into it after a conversation with Dr. Michelle Robin, who was my guest last Friday, of, wait a minute, this should be part of my routine. I've told you many times over the years that I get in and out of those vision pursue habits, and really to spend 10 or 15 minutes just listening to one of those meditations a day gets you back to where you need to go. I was thinking about you recently because I think many of us are taking more walks through the neighborhood, and sometimes I just want to listen to music. But there are a couple of really, really cool exercises on your app that are driving or walking exercises. I remember the first time I did the walking one, I remember texting you. I was in Minneapolis with the Royals and just started walking around the skyways. And essentially it's getting you to be in the now. It's getting you to be in the moment and not so busy multitasking and doing all these things. And I found myself just noticing people and stores, and suddenly my head wasn't down. The driving app is the same way with a lot of safety. If anything, I think the driving app actually makes you a more safe driver if you are the type like me that glances at the phone when you shouldn't be. So I bring all that up because I just wanted to ask you, are there some things right now, just simple things, quick little small changes that the average person that's never studied performance mindset, they don't have to be average, by the way, but your everyday person can do when they go out for a walk or they're on the treadmill or whatever it is? Is there something they could do right now just to get in the now?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. A couple that come to mind. The breath is always a great one, and there's different breathing techniques. I like just a simple pause in between each inhale and exhale. And so you just notice that pause, and it's just a little interruption. And to do that, you have to be conscious of your breath, right? To do that. Another great one for walks is to look up. Now, be careful when you do this. Got to preface this, but the natural tendency when we auto-think, when we go into mind-wandering state, we look down. The reason we look down is so we don't trip, right? So when we're looking down, then we can walk unconsciously. And what you're talking about is mindful walking or consciously walking. And what can help is if you look up slightly, still have a somewhat of a view of where you're going, but if you look up, now you can't mind wander anymore because your brain's going to say, well, we could trip and fall. So that can be a helpful one. Any of the sensory, right? I really love just listening for the faintest sounds in the room that you're in. Even if there's people, noise going on around you, just try to pick up as many sounds as you can. And you'll notice that it's really hard to mind wander, which is just talking in your head. It's really hard to talk in your head when you're actually listening and listening really intently. So that's another one that I like. I love power breathing. It's another one that we teach in the app. And again, this is like almost like a hyperventilating breathing where you're taking in as much oxygen as you possibly can. Again, very hard to mind wander when you're hyperventilating. Makes sense. So all of these are just things to interrupt. And I would also say that probably the biggest one right now that I would encourage people with, it does take a little more training, is with the emotion, right? Is allowing that uncertainty that you're feeling right now, that angst that you're feeling, that concern about the future, that concern for loved ones. Let that also bring you into the present moment. And let that be your guide. Let that be your messenger, right? That's trying to tell you, hey, this is really important. And practice sitting with that emotion. Another great way to interrupt the mind.
It's so interesting. And the other one too, and we won't get too in depth to this, but I would encourage everybody to check out Vision Pursue. But I think that there's a tendency when this is all going wrong, and I talked about it snowballing before when those thoughts start to come in. So that's really easy to get in that moment and stop it is hard. But you guys talk and preach about embracing that emotion, acknowledging that emotion. And I think that we are all built or have always thought, well, if the negative's coming in, then we've got to find a way to push it away. I don't want anything to do with that. And you almost say, wait a minute, you do want to acknowledge it. How come?
Yeah, the negative is good. Your brain's job is to protect you, right, and to help you survive. And so it's much more concerned with threats than it is opportunities. And so it is doing its job when it's alerting you to potential negative consequences, negative threats. And so you don't want to ignore that. It's just you're not allowing your brain to do the job it was designed to do. The question is, how are you going to respond to it? Right. So you mentioned, having some negative thoughts and kind of going down there a couple of times. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to here are struggling with that at times, right? Maybe you're laying in bed at night or you have a few quiet moments and all of a sudden you just are overcome with this intense emotion, this intense concern. And then you can start to play out all these different scenarios. The question is not if that's going to happen. The question is, when is that going to happen? And then how are you going to respond when that happens? And the key is not trying to stop it from happening. The key is thanking it for being there. Because again, it's a messenger trying to give you an important alert about your environment. And you want to let it do its thing. So, and everyone listening could do a really quick thought experiment. Try to force your mind to stop thinking and see what happens. And then just let your mind do whatever it wants to do. Just let it run. Let it go run. And you just notice where it goes. And you'll notice that the second exercise there is normally a whole lot easier and actually calms the brain down versus trying to stop it from thinking negatively.
Takes work. There's no doubt about it. And actually, I think it's really interesting too, because when you do that exercise, you don't know where it's going to go, but it's really interesting observing that it's going places.
That's it.
Does that make sense? Like I can't tell you where it's going to wander off to, but so often we're wrapped up in whatever's going on. You don't even know that it's wandering around. So when you actually can observe that, it almost allows you to understand that brain a little bit more, how powerful it is. I know that sounds so obvious. We all know the brain's powerful and complicated. That was one of the first questions I asked you. But when you could actually watch the way it starts to move around, it kind of, at least to me, it gives me an appreciation of how challenging and how tough this is.
It can be, yeah. I would say that, without the proper skills, it is very, very challenging. The problem is that normally we're doing a lot more resisting than we are working with it. And so, so I would encourage everyone, just like you said, to not try to judge negative thoughts, negative emotions as bad, but to embrace them like they're really there to help you. And the more that you're working with them, the more they'll tend to regulate to appropriate levels, right? So even if one's just really overdoing it, that's okay. Acknowledge it, let it run its course, and that's doing some really great brain training.
Yeah, a couple final questions for you. One is kind of a football question, because you were describing that, you're down 21-0 or you're up 21-0 and how you respond to it. I mean, it kind of reminded me of that Chiefs playoff game where they were down and then suddenly you look over and you see Patrick Mahomes fired up on the sideline. He didn't go into that shell.
That's right.
And so I'm not necessarily asking you to diagnose him. We all know how ridiculously special he is. You don't need to be in Kansas City to understand that either. But does he potentially have something? Is he wired differently, or I don't know what he's worked on to have that ability to be that calm, at 24 or whatever years old he is, amidst all of the noise, amidst all of the potential. I mean, they look like they were done. And yet here's this kid that's calming everyone else down and doing everything that basically you have talked about here. Is that, I don't know if you know the answer. Are some people just born with those abilities, or is that something that you really have to work on?
I think a lot of it is natural for him. I'm sure that he's spent time working on it as well. But yeah, I think I'm sure it's a combination of the two for him. But it really is a special combination that he brings with his physical abilities, but then also his leadership abilities. And you see how the team rallies around him and how much they respect him. And there is never a time when that team thinks that they're out of it. I mean, when you've got a guy like that at the helm, and you've got a really great coaching staff and Coach Andy leading the way, it's a really special combination. And so I'm thankful that I get to watch it. I'm a little bummed that I wasn't born 10 years later. Got to be a part of this, but it's special to watch. And hopefully, like you said, we can get baseball and football back online here quickly.
Well, we all need it, and I'll keep saying that we need it, but we need safety too. I understand people are seeing this thing a little bit differently. I keep defaulting to this science. They know more than I do. I'll put it that way. And so that's a whole nother story. The last question, actually 2 parts here, because I asked so many of my guests this. Small ball. I talk about small ball in baseball terms. It's the bunts, it's the defense, it's all those little things that sometimes should outshine the home run. The home run gets all the attention. The big touchdown pass gets all the attention. I know I don't need to put these into sports terms for you, but what's small ball to you? What are the little things in life or your company or performance mindset? What are the little things that add up to the big things?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's last 5 or 6 years, that's really taken on a whole new meaning with a lot of the mindfulness and mindfulness-based meditation training that I've done and that we do with organizations. And it really begins to challenge how we judge moments, right? And how we judge activities and what creates a meaningful, significant moment, and what is an insignificant, meaningless moment. And it's a really amazing to me how our automatic brains just very quickly judge something, usually based on other people's perspective of what is important and what matters. And in mindfulness training, we're challenged to elevate all the moments that we experience to a very similar level. And some of those we have to elevate that seem seemingly insignificant, right, and meaningless and boring and monotonous, and we have to challenge ourselves to raise those. And then we have to decrease the other ones, right, that where the whole world's like, oh wow, that's really important, that's significant, that's a Super Bowl, that's an NFL contract, and we're trying to create more of a flat line there between those. And for me, at least, that's been really important. And so it's much less about what I'm doing and more about how I'm doing it. And because of that, and because of the skills that I've learned, I have the ability, and I'm not great, I'm not perfect at it by any stretch, but I have the ability to bring purpose to what I'm doing, to make what I'm doing right now purposeful, meaningful, significant, even if it's doing laundry, right? Even if it's doing yard work, even if it's whatever it is. And that's a really, really empowering mental skill to have. And so I would say everything is small ball. And it's always what you're doing right now.
It's interesting because one of the elements that I consider small ball is finding your purpose. And I say that finding your purpose isn't getting up to make money. Yes, that's a reward, perhaps. But what I put it simply this way, and what you're saying goes even deeper, very much like you got the MLK clip on your app about being the best street sweeper that you can, if that's what you're doing. Be the best at what you can be. I call it this: what gets you up out of bed every day? When you get out of bed, what's your purpose? What are you hoping to do? And I feel like right now, and I don't mean to get all preachy and on the soapbox here, but I think we all have a greater purpose right now, the greater good. I've heard it from people on this show, the Andy Riegers of the world, the pivots that are going on right now. Hey, we make good whiskey. No, now we're making hand sanitizer to save lives, to help, the medical community. And I do truly believe right now that as we all try to come together, hopefully, that you can make impacts in different ways. And so I don't know that that's being the best at doing the laundry, although I should probably focus on doing that a little bit better. But it's a great practice. Like finding that purpose in everything that you do really brings meaning to your life.
It does, and it can be challenging, right? Because there are things that are really important, like the things we do in this life matter, right? At the same time, for a lot of people right now, they've lost their sense of purpose with their job, right? They don't have a job, or they're on furlough. It's been suspended this afternoon. I'm doing a training for a bunch of Ivy League student athletes, and a lot of them are struggling with a lack of purpose. Right? Because their purpose was to go play their sport and be the best student athlete they could be, and that's taken away from them. And so how do we begin to recalibrate what our purpose is? And that's a challenge, but I think it's really important. And I think it also comes back to that, like to your point, our purpose doesn't have to be always out there in the future somewhere else. And it doesn't mean that it can't be changing. And so for me, I always like to ask the question, what's my primary purpose? Right? We all have a lot of secondary purposes, and it's easy to get enamored with those. But what's my primary purpose, which is always what I'm doing right now, right? And maybe that's trying to figure out what my purpose is for the next few months until this comes back online. And to your point, there's a lot of opportunities for us to serve our community and find ways to help. At the end of the day, though, I come back and say we can define purpose in a lot of different ways. And it could be as simple as just doing the laundry today, right? Or getting out of bed and taking a shower and getting out of your sweatpants that you've been in for the last 2 weeks, right? or whatever it might be. So we don't always have to have this big grandiose purpose in order to be engaged in what we're doing. And then when that happens, you get the ability to bring purpose to the work that you're doing versus waiting for it to dictate, well, am I going to do that? Is this meaningful? No, you bring the meaning to what you're doing and the experience will improve.
Today's a sweatpants day. Yesterday was shorts. So, I'm going to try to mix it up a little bit.
That's good.
See what we can do. Hey, John, I appreciate all the insight, of course. I'm a huge fan of everything that you're doing, and certainly you as a person. I can't wait. We're long overdue anyway, at some point, for a whiskey and a cigar at a time when that is safe to do, and we can get back to whatever the new normal looks like. So in the meantime, stay healthy, keep doing what you're doing. I know that you'll find that purpose every single day. In whatever it is you're doing. And so I'll encourage everybody, I'll pop this up again, to visit visionpursue.com. It's I feel like I say this to a lot of guests, but this is one where truly when I say we could talk about this for hours and hours or days and days. And I know you can, because you do every single day and learning every single day. So continue to share that with everyone. I know that it's making an impact, and I appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah. I do want to give a shout out to Joel. I don't know if anyone else saw you were named to that top list of speakers. I'm not sure who the source was, but congratulations on that. That's fantastic. And
thank you.
There's a lot of people that talk about sports, but Joel's one of the best at bringing meaning and really tying those stories that he has from sports to things that can really help your organization. So Joel, thanks for the work that you're doing, and keep up the great work.
I appreciate it. Hang tight for 1 sec. I'm going to pull John down. I'm going to say goodbye to him once we get off of the show here. It's awesome insight. I'll ask everyone again what I say every day. If you could share that with your friends, share that with your network. I believe those are conversations that can help people. And John is one that I learn from every time. I mean, I'll circle back to some practices that I have let go that I already knew about just based on that conversation today. So appreciate the visit with John McGraw. Thanks to the support from KC Cattle Company. Patrick Montgomery's been on this show before. He's also been on my podcast, served this country as an Army Ranger, and now he's serving all of us Wagyu beef from up in Weston, Missouri. Veteran owned and operated, so check them out. They will deliver to your house. That was true before these tough times. It's true right now. So a nice service, and thanks to all my friends at Enterprise Bank and Trust for taking care of everyone here in our community. That's going to do it for another episode of Rounding the Bases Live, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust. Have a really interesting guest tomorrow by the name of Chris Keel. He's an economist. He'll be the first one to tell you, maybe not quite in these words, maybe so, that economists can be boring. I think that's maybe part of the nature, right? They're super smart. He's really, really interesting. He's funny, he's witty, and he's super smart. He speaks all around the world, so he's going to be my guest. Hope you'll join me for that. And thanks for watching another episode of Rounding the Bases Live, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust. Have a safe day, everyone.